Why would a woman who built a global empire leave $33 million to a man who spends his days unclogging drains and fixing leaky pipes? That's the question everyone in Chicago is asking right now. They're looking at me with suspicion and confusion, wondering how a retired power plant worker came to hold the keys to the kingdom. But the answer isn't about money, business strategy, or corporate acquisitions. It's about a promise made in a diner 30 years ago over apple pie and bad coffee. It's about the difference between building a fortune and building a person. Before I elaborate, tell me in the comments. Would you rather entrust your life's work to someone who understands business, or someone who understands you? The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor just as Mrs. Jenkins' voice rose through the thin apartment wall. Your sprinklers are flooding my begonias again, Isaiah, she shouted. I grabbed a dish towel, kneeling among the ceramic shards. Amply 5 years old, and I was still cleaning up messes that were not entirely my fault. The automatic sprinkler system I had installed last month for the complex had one loose joint that sent water cascading over the property line every third day. I tried explaining the repair schedule to my neighbor, but patience was not a virtue Mrs. Jenkins possessed. The phone rang. I ignored it, focused on soaping up the spreading coffee puddle. The machine would catch it, but the ringing persisted, cutting through her continued shouting from next door. Something about property values and inconsiderate tenants. It was a rhythm I knew well. My life had become a series of small manageable disasters. A leaky pipe in Unit Part B. A broken railing on the back porch. A neighbor who needed someone to blame for her dying flowers. I fixed them all because fixing things was what I did. It was easier to mend a broken pipe than a broken life. On the fifth ring, I stood up, tossing the soaked towel into the sink. Isaiah Turner speaking. Mr. Turner, this is Franklin Rhodes from Rhodes Sterling and Associates in Chicago. The man's voice carried that careful professional tone I had learned to recognize over the years, the kind that preceded bad news. It was the voice of a man wearing a suit that cost more than my car, calling a man who was currently wiping Folgers off his knees. I am calling regarding Keisha Elizabeth Turner. My hand tightened around the receiver. Nobody had called Keisha by her full name in my presence for 15 years. Hearing it spoken aloud in my quiet kitchen felt like a violation, like a ghost walking through a locked door. What about her? I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. Sir, I am very sorry to inform you that Mrs. Turner passed away on Tuesday evening. The funeral service is scheduled for this Friday at the Southside Memorial Chapel. The words hit like a physical blow. I sank into the kitchen chair. Its familiar creak suddenly too loud in the silence that followed. Tuesday evening. That was 3 days ago. 3 days while I had been worrying about sprinkler systems and coffee stains and the price of eggs. 3 days while the world had continued to spin for everyone else, but had apparently stopped for the woman who had once been my entire universe. Mr. Turner, are you there? Yes, I am here. My voice sounded strange, distant. How did you get my number? Your name was listed in Mrs. Turner's personal FX as an emergency contact. I understand you were previously married. Previously married. 200 years reduced to a legal footnote. A checkbox on a form. Yes, we divorced in 2010. The words came automatically, muscle memory from various forms and applications over the years. I see. Well, there will be a reading of the will, following the service. You are named as a beneficiary, so your presence would be appreciated. Beneficiary. The word felt foreign, impossible. Keisha had built her empire after our divorce, transforming the small consulting business she had started during our marriage into something I barely recognized from the newspaper articles. She was a titan of industry now, a woman who dined with senators and reshaped skylines. I was a man who fixed sprinklers and argued with Mrs. Jenkins. What could she possibly have left me? Mr. Turner, will you be attending? Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Jenkins examining her waterlogged begonias, hands on her hips in that stance that meant another confrontation was brewing. But her complaints seemed to come from another world now, muffled and insignificant. The chapel, I said slowly. Which one did you say? Southside Memorial on Grand Avenue. The service begins at 2, followed by a brief reception. The will reading is scheduled for 442 in our offices downtown. I found myself nodding, though he could not see me. I will be there. After hanging up, I remained in the chair, staring at the phone as if it might ring again and deliver different news. The coffee stains on the floor had already begun to set, dark rings that would need scrubbing, but I could not move. I could not process the simple fact that Keisha, vibrant, stubborn, impossible Keisha, was gone. The silence in the apartment felt heavier than before. It was not just quiet, it was empty. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories I had tried so hard to forget. As I sat there, the name Keisha Elizabeth Turner echoed in my mind. It was not the name of the CEO or the business mogul. It was the name of the girl I met in the snow. Each syllable pulled me backward through time, dragging me away from my gray reality and back to the moment where my life truly began. The dust motes swirled and settled, reforming into the steam rising from a cup of hot chocolate on a countertop in Chicago. I was suddenly 24 years old again, sitting in Murphy's Diner on a snowy February evening in Suppin 22. I was watching a woman in a red wool coat argue with the manager about his hiring practices. "You are telling me you will not consider female applicants for the weekend shift because women cannot handle the late-night pressure?" Her voice carried across the nearly empty restaurant, clear and uncompromising. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have heard all week." I had stopped mid-bite of my apple pie, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. The woman had turned slightly and I could see her profile. Sharp cheekbones, a determined jaw, and dark hair that caught the fluorescent light. She was magnificent in her anger. Most people in that neighborhood kept their heads down and their mouths shut, but she stood there like a queen, addressing a peasant. I found myself hoping the manager would keep arguing, just so I could listen to her tear his logic apart. "Ma'am, I did not mean any offense," the manager stammered, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. "Of course you did not mean offense," she replied, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You just meant to discriminate." She pulled a business card from her purse, sliding it across the counter with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "When you change your mind about hiring based on qualifications rather than outdated assumptions, call me." The door chimes jingled as she left, letting in a gust of freezing wind that swirled around my ankles. The diner felt smaller somehow, drained of electricity and color. I watched through the window as she climbed into a beat-up blue sedan, noting how she checked her mirrors twice before pulling into traffic. Careful and methodical, but not afraid to fight for what was right. "That one is trouble," the manager muttered loud enough for the whole place to hear. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill next to my half-eaten pie. "No," I said, surprising myself with my own certainty. "That one is extraordinary." The business card lay abandoned on the counter. Keisha Fans, business consultant. He memorized the phone number before stepping into the February wind. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to call. When I finally did, she answered on the second ring, with a brisk professional greeting. "Keisha Fans speaking." "This is Isaiah Turner," I said, gripping the receiver until my knuckles turned white. "We have not met, but I saw you at Murphy's Diner on Friday night." There was a pause. "The man with the apple pie who defended my honor to the manager." "You heard that?" she asked. "I was getting my gloves from the car. You left a good tip too." I could hear the smile in her voice, and it warmed me more than the radiator in my small apartment. "So, Isaiah Turner, what can I do for you?" "Are you asking me on a date or do you need business consulting?" "Definitely a date. Though if you have any advice about convincing beautiful women to have dinner with strangers, I could use the consultation." She laughed then, a real laugh that bubbled up from deep inside. "Saturday night, Romano's on 3rd Street at 7 o'clock. She wore the same red coat to dinner, but underneath was a black dress that made my pulse race. We talked for 3 hours about everything except business. We discussed her childhood in the city, my job at the power plant, and our shared love of old jazz records and spicy food. When she laughed at my story about accidentally flooding my apartment while trying to fix a leaky faucet, I knew I was falling. I knew I was done looking. 6 months later, I proposed in that same diner, sliding a ring across the same counter where she had left her business card. "Marry me, Keisha Vance. Make me the luckiest man in Chicago." She said yes, before I had finished asking. Our wedding day blazed with September sunshine, the kind of perfect weather that makes promises feel possible. Keisha wore a dress she had found at a thrift store and altered herself, and she carried wild flowers we had picked that morning from the park. My hands shook as I slipped the ring onto her finger. "Forever," she whispered, and I believed her completely. We had nothing, but we had everything. We moved into a small walk-up apartment that smelled of floor wax and old timber. I worked double shifts at the plant to keep the lights on, and she worked late into the night at our wobbly kitchen table, building her business one client at a time. I would come home with grease under my fingernails and find her asleep over a stack of spreadsheets. I would carry her to bed, marveling at how someone so fierce could look so peaceful. We were a team. It was us against the world, and for a long time the world did not stand a chance. We scraped pennies to buy groceries, celebrated victories with cheap wine, and danced in the living room to the radio. I was proud of her ambition, and she was proud of my steady hands. We were building a life brick by brick, and the foundation felt solid enough to hold up the sky. Marcus arrived 2 years later, a squalling red-faced miracle who transformed our quiet house into something alive with purpose. I remember standing in the hospital room watching Keisha cradle our son with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. She looked down at him and promised him the world. I thought she meant love and safety, but I would learn later that she meant the literal world: assets, portfolios, influence. Even then, holding that perfect baby, I noticed how Keisha's eyes occasionally drifted to the financial magazine someone had left on the nightstand. She was already planning his future before he could even lift his head. But as Marcus grew from a toddler into a schoolboy, I began to notice things I had missed in those first blissful years. The shift was subtle at first, like the slow turning of the seasons. When he turned 7, Keisha bought him a computer. It was not a toy but a real machine worth more than my monthly salary at the plant. "He needs to understand technology, Isaiah," she explained, watching him navigate programs I had never heard of. "The future belongs to kids who think digitally." I had suggested teaching him to fish instead, to feel the tug of a line and the quiet of the morning. She had laughed, but the sound lacked the warmth I remembered from our diner dates. We had moved by then to Hillcrest Avenue. It was a house with 3 bathrooms and a kitchen island bigger than our old apartment living room. Keisha's consulting firm had landed a massive contract with a logistics consortium, and suddenly we had money for things I had never imagined needing. A housekeeper came twice a week to clean floors that were already clean. Our refrigerator dispensed crushed ice through the door. Marcus had a bedroom that looked like a catalog for expensive toys. "Isn't this wonderful?" Keisha asked one evening, gesturing at our new dining room with its crystal chandelier and a table that seated 12. "We can finally entertain properly." I missed our old kitchen table, scarred from years of Marcus's coloring projects and our late-night conversations over cheap wine. This new table reflected light, like a mirror showing every fingerprint and demanding coasters and placemats. The entertaining started almost immediately. Business associates, potential clients, and other successful couples filled our home. Their conversations revolved around market share and investment strategies and private schools. I would wear my best shirt and try to contribute, but discussions about hedge funds and corporate restructuring left me feeling like I was speaking a foreign language badly. "Isaiah works at the power plant," Keisha would explain when someone asked what I did, and I heard something new in her voice. It was not pride anymore. It was an apologetic edge. It was an explanation that sounded suspiciously like an excuse, as if my job required a pardon. Marcus thrived in this new world. At 10 years old, he could discuss computer programming with Keisha's tech-savvy clients. At 12, he was critiquing the wine choices at restaurants I could not afford on my own. At 14, he rolled his eyes when I suggested family camping trips, preferring Keisha's business conferences in New York and Los Angeles. "Dad doesn't understand" became his favorite phrase, usually delivered with the exasperated sigh of someone far too sophisticated for mundane concerns. The gap between us widened with every deposit into Keisha's bank account. I was still the man who fixed things with his hands, the man who believed in hard work and quiet evenings. But my family was becoming something else entirely. They were becoming people who hired others to fix things. People who measured value in net worth rather than character. I watched my son drifting away from me on a tide of money I could not stem. I tried to anchor him. I tried to remind him of where we came from. But Keisha was teaching him to fly, and he was looking down at me from a height I could never reach. The intimacy of our early marriage began to dissolve under the pressure of her ambition. Dinner conversations became strategy sessions for her firm. Our anniversary became a date on a calendar that she frequently had to reschedule. I was living in a mansion surrounded by beautiful things, but I had never felt more alone. The ghost of the girl in the red coat was fading, and in her place was a titan of industry who looked at me and saw a relic of a past she had outgrown. I held on because I loved her and because I loved our son. But I could feel the ground beneath us cracking, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the earth opened up and swallowed the life we had built. The house on Hillcrest Avenue became a golden cage where my relevance quietly withered away. It was a beautiful prison of marble floors and vaulted ceilings that echoed with the sounds of a life I did not recognize. We had 3 living rooms, but we did not do much living in any of them. They were showrooms filled with furniture that was too expensive to sit on and art that was too abstract to understand. I would walk through the hallways in my work boots, conscious of the dirt I might track onto the pristine white rugs, feeling like a service worker in my own home. The silence in that house was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was the silence of a museum after hours, cold and judgmental and demanding a certain kind of hushed reverence. Marcus grew up breathing this rarefied air. By the time he hit double digits, he was already more comfortable in a blazer than a baseball jersey. I remember walking into the den one Tuesday evening to find him watching a financial news network. He was 10 years old. Most kids his age were watching cartoons or playing video games, but Marcus was tracking the ticker tape that scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Dad," he said, without looking away from the television, "do you think the tech sector is overvalued right now?" I stood there in the doorway holding a grease-stained pizza box I had brought home as a treat. "I do not know, Marcus. I just know the pizza is getting cold." He sighed, a sound of profound disappointment that seemed too old for his small chest. "You should really pay more attention to market trends. Inflation is going to eat your savings if you are not careful." I looked at Keisha, hoping she would laugh or tell him to go wash his hands for dinner. Instead, she nodded in approval from her perch on the leather sofa. "He is right, Isaiah. He is learning the language of power. You could learn a thing or two from him." That was the dynamic that settled over us like a thick fog. Marcus was the prodigy, and I was the well-meaning but simple-minded peasant who needed to be educated. When he turned 12, we went to an Italian restaurant downtown to celebrate his report card. It was a place with white tablecloths and waiters who wore tuxedos. When the waiter poured a sample of the wine for the table, Marcus picked up Keisha's glass. He swirled it around, sniffed it, and wrinkled his nose. "This has turned," he announced loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "It is oxidized. Send it back." I was mortified. I reached across the table to stop him. "Marcus, that is enough. You are 12 years old. You do not know anything about wine." But Keisha placed a hand on my arm, silencing me. "Let him speak, Isaiah. He has a refined palate. We pay enough for this dinner, so we should get quality." The waiter apologized and took the bottle away, and Marcus sat back with a smug satisfaction that made my stomach turn. I saw a spoiled child who needed to learn humility. Keisha saw a future CEO who knew how to demand what he was worth. That night, I tried to talk to him about respect and gratitude, but he just put on his headphones and tuned me out. The phrase "Dad doesn't understand" became the soundtrack of my life. It was the answer to every suggestion I made. I wanted to take him fishing at the lake, where my father had taken me. I wanted to sit in a boat and watch the sunrise and talk about nothing. "Dad doesn't understand," Marcus complained to Keisha. "I can't be out of cell service for a whole weekend. I have online seminars to watch." I suggested we build a treehouse in the backyard, something we could work on together with hammers and nails. "Dad doesn't understand," he groaned. "That is manual labor. Why would I want to do that when we can hire a contractor?" He was right. I did not understand. I did not understand how a boy could prefer a spreadsheet to a sunset, or how a son could look at his father and see nothing but a cautionary tale of mediocrity. The house became a revolving door for Keisha's network. We hosted dinner parties that felt more like board meetings with better food. The guests were always the same type of people. Men with firm handshakes and wandering eyes that scanned the room for someone more important to talk to. Women who wore diamonds like armor and spoke in hushed tones about summer homes and private schools. I would stand by the bar nursing a beer, while Keisha held court in the center of the room. She was radiant in these moments, charged with the energy of deal-making. When she finally introduced me, it was always with a subtle hesitation. "This is my husband Isaiah," she would say, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "He works at the power plant." The reaction was always the same: a polite smile, a brief nod, a quick assessment that I was of no value to their careers. "Oh, how interesting. they would say before turning back to Keisha to discuss interest rates or zoning laws. I was a prop. I was the requisite husband, a piece of background scenery that proved Keisha was a family woman. But I was also an embarrassment. I could hear it in the way she explained my job. She never said he keeps the lights on for the whole city. She never said he works hard to keep us safe. She said he works at the plant with a tone that suggested it was a temporary condition or a charitable hobby. One evening during a particularly lavish gathering, I found myself cornered by a venture capitalist named Richard. He was asking me about my portfolio, and I made the mistake of telling him I preferred low-risk mutual funds. He laughed, a barking sound that drew stares. Mutual funds, he scoffed. That is like keeping your money under a mattress. You need to leverage your assets. You need to be aggressive. Keisha walked up at that moment, slipping her arm through Richard's. Don't bore Isaiah with high finance, Richard, she said with a tight smile. He prefers the simple life. He is happy just punching the clock. The group laughed. It was a small, polite laughter that chipped away another piece of my dignity. I looked at Marcus across the room. He was 15 then, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He was holding a glass of sparkling water and laughing at something a managing partner was saying. He looked at me, saw the humiliation on my face, and looked away. He did not defend me, did not come to my side. He aligned himself with the winners, and in his eyes I was clearly a loser. That was the moment I realized I had not just lost my wife to her ambition. I had lost my son to her worldview. I was living in a mansion surrounded by people who shared my last name but none of my values. I was the gardener in a garden I had helped plant, tolerated but not respected, necessary for the maintenance but unwelcome at the harvest. The golden cage was locked, and I was the only one who realized we were trapped. The 16th birthday is supposed to be a milestone, a bridge between childhood and the beginning of adulthood. For our family, it was a declaration of war. I had wanted a barbecue. I had pictured plastic tables in the backyard, burgers sizzling on the grill, and Marcus laughing with a few friends from school. I wanted sticky fingers and loud music and the kind of unpretentious joy that leaves grass stains on your knees. I wanted my son to be 16. But Keisha decided he needed to be a corporate asset. She planned an event that looked less like a birthday party and more like a shareholder meeting for a Fortune 500 company. The night before the party, I stood in our kitchen watching a team of caterers unpack crates of imported seafood. The house was already buzzing with event planners who were treating our living room like a staging ground for a military operation. This is embarrassing, Keisha, I said, keeping my voice low so the staff wouldn't hear. He is 16 years old. He is not 50. He does not need a string quartet or a sushi bar. He needs to just be a kid. Keisha did not even look up from her tablet, where she was finalizing the guest list. She adjusted a centerpiece with the same cold precision she brought to contract negotiations. He is growing up in a different world than we did, Isaiah. She turned to face me fully, and for a moment I saw something terrifyingly cold in her eyes. It was calculation where there used to be warmth. These connections matter. The people coming tomorrow are the people who will hire him, invest in him, and shape his future. Being just a kid is a luxury we cannot afford to give him. The world is competitive. Either we prepare him to win, or we prepare him to lose. I thought about my own 16th birthday. Fishing with my father on a muddy riverbank, a homemade cake that listed to the side, and presents wrapped in the Sunday comics. It had been perfect in its simplicity because it was real. This party was a performance. The next evening our backyard was unrecognizable. Tents with silk linings covered the lawn I used to mow. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that I could not pronounce. The guest list was a who is who of the city's elite. There were business partners, local politicians, and clients. Keisha was trying to impress. Their children were there too, miniature versions of their parents in designer clothes, holding conversations about summer internships and college applications. I wandered through the crowd in my best suit, feeling like an imposter at my own son's celebration. Then came the moment of the gift. Keisha gathered everyone on the front driveway. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a sleek black luxury sedan with a red bow on the hood. It was a German engineering marvel, worth more than the first house Keisha and I had lived in. The crowd gasped and applauded. Marcus walked around the car, running his hand along the fender with a look of pure reverence. He did not look at me. He looked at the car, and then he looked at his mother with a worshipful expression that broke my heart. "Thank you," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "This is exactly what I need to get to my internship." The applause was thunderous. Keisha beamed, basking in the admiration of the crowd who whispered about her generosity and success. I stood at the back of the circle, my hands in my pockets, feeling a cold wind that had nothing to do with the weather. I had bought him a vintage watch, something with gears and history, something I had hoped to teach him to maintain. It sat wrapped in my dresser drawer upstairs, suddenly foolish and inadequate. Later that night, as the party raged on, I found Marcus standing alone by the pool. The noise of the celebration felt distant here, muffled by the landscaping. He was staring at his reflection in the water, looking strangely small despite his expensive suit. For a second, just a split second, I saw the little boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. I saw confusion and exhaustion and a loneliness that no amount of money could cure. I walked over and stood beside him. "You okay, buddy?" I asked softly. "It is a lot of attention for one night." He straightened quickly. The vulnerability vanished as if a shutter had been slammed down. He adjusted his cufflinks, slipping back into the persona Keisha had helped him craft. The CEO mask was back in place. "Of course I am okay," he said, his tone defensive. "Why wouldn't I be? Everyone is having a great time." Mom really outdid herself. I hesitated, wanting to reach past the armor. "You know you don't have to be on all the time, Marcus. Not with me. It is okay to just be tired. It is okay to think this is all a bit much." He turned to look at me and his eyes were hard. "That is the difference between you and Mom," he said. "You think this is too much. She knows this is just the baseline. You are always looking for a way to be comfortable, Dad. You are always looking for the easy exit." That stung, but I kept my voice steady. "I am looking for what is real, Marcus. None of this is real. These people don't know you. They know your mother's bank account." Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That is exactly the kind of thinking that is holding you back. You settled for mediocrity, Isaiah." He used my first name. He didn't call me Dad. He called me Isaiah like I was an employee. He was reprimanding. "You settled for a small life, and you want me to settle too, because it would make you feel better about yourself. I am not going to make that mistake. I am going to be someone who matters." The words hit like physical blows. Settled for mediocrity. As if 25 years of keeping the power grid running meant nothing. As if being a steady present father was somehow shameful. As if loving him without condition was a weakness. I looked at my son and realized he was gone. The boy I had carried on my shoulders was dead, and in his place stood a stranger who measured human worth in dollar signs. "I love you, Marcus," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I hope one day you understand that you are worth more than a car or a job title." He turned back to the pool, his profile sharp and cold against the light from the house. "I think you should go back inside, Dad," he said, dismissing me. "You are embarrassing yourself." I walked away, leaving him alone with his reflection. I went upstairs to our bedroom where I could still hear the music thumping below. I sat on the edge of the bed and realized that the war was over. I had lost. Keisha had won. She had created the perfect heir to her empire, and in the process she had destroyed my son. The party continued late into the night, celebrating a young man who had everything except the one thing he truly needed. The party marked the beginning of the end, though I did not recognize it then. What followed were years of slow-motion disaster, like watching a landslide from the bottom of the mountain. It was inevitable, destructive, and impossible to stop. Keisha's business consumed more of her time, more of her attention, and more of her soul. Weekend family dinners became conference calls, where she would hold up a hand to silence me, while she negotiated terms with unseen partners. Vacation plans got cancelled for client emergencies so often that I eventually stopped making them. I stopped buying travel guides. I stopped looking at maps. I learned to stay put. Marcus's life became a series of events that competed with board meetings, and the meetings always won. "You do not understand the pressure I am under," Keisha would say when I complained about missing another one of his milestones. "This business supports our lifestyle, Isaiah. Someone has to make the hard choices." But I understood pressure. I knew the pressure of keeping a power grid running during a blizzard. I knew the pressure of making sure thousands of people had heat when the temperature dropped below zero. The difference was that my pressure served something larger than myself. Her pressure served the god of accumulation, and that god was never satisfied. By the time Marcus graduated high school and left for business school, he had become a stranger to me. He came home for holidays full of theories about market dynamics and personal optimization. He looked at our house and our life with barely concealed contempt. "You could do more, Dad," he would say, as if my contentment was a personal failing. "Mom started with nothing and built an empire. You have had the same job for 20 years. Some things matter more than money," I would reply. But he had already stopped listening. He was tuning into a frequency I could not hear. The final explosion came during his college graduation. It was supposed to be the culmination of everything we had worked for. I had flown out a day early to make sure everything was perfect. I sat in the stadium under the scorching sun, saving a seat for Keisha. I checked my watch. I checked the entrance. I checked my phone. The ceremony began. The procession started. Pomp and circumstance played over the loudspeakers, and the seat beside me remained empty. I watched my son walk across the stage and scan the crowd. I waved. I cheered. I stood up so he could see me. But his eyes swept past me, searching for the one person who wasn't there. When he realized she wasn't coming, his face did not crumble. It hardened. He accepted her absence as the cost of doing business. I flew home alone. Keisha arrived 2 days later, straight from the airport, still wearing her business suit. She had closed a massive acquisition deal in London. She walked into the kitchen where I was sitting in the dark. I did not turn on the lights. I did not want to see the granite countertops or the stainless steel appliances. I just wanted to sit in the wreckage of my marriage. "This is enough, Keisha," I said quietly. "Family has to come first sometimes. You missed his graduation. You missed the moment he became a man." She stood by the refrigerator checking emails on her phone. The blue light illuminated her face, making her look cold and statue-like. "Don't you dare lecture me about priorities," she snapped without looking up. "Everything we have exists because of my work. Everything Marcus has accomplished is because I paved the way." "What about everything we have lost?" I asked. "Like what?" She finally looked up, genuinely puzzled. "Like us. Like being a family instead of a corporation." She stared at me for a long moment. The silence stretched between us, heavy and final. I saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. We were not a family anymore. We had not been a family for a long time. "Maybe it is time we stop pretending this is working," she said quietly. Her voice was devoid of emotion. It was a business assessment. "We are a business arrangement that has outlived its usefulness, Isaiah. We are an asset that has become a liability." The divorce took 6 months. Keisha's lawyers were efficient, professional, and devastating. They dissected 22 years of marriage with the same clinical detachment a butcher uses on a carcass. I got the rental property on the edge of town. A modest house we had bought years ago as an investment, and enough money to live simply. She kept everything else: the mansion, the cars, the investments, the company, and most painful of all, she kept Marcus. I remember the day I moved out. I was packing the last of my boxes into my truck. Marcus had come over to help Keisha with some paperwork. He stood on the porch watching me load my life into cardboard boxes. He did not offer to help. He leaned against the pillar, looking like a young prince watching a servant depart. "You are making a mistake leaving," I told him. "You are choosing a cold life, Marcus." He shook his head, a small pitying smile on his lips. "You are holding her back, Dad," he said. "You are holding me back too. All this guilt about family values and simple living is toxic. It is weak. I can't be around that negativity anymore. I need to be around winners." The word hung in the air between us. Winners. He saw life as a game with a scoreboard, and in his eyes I had 0 points. "I love you, son," I said. "That will never change no matter how much money you make." He didn't respond. He just turned and walked back into the house, closing the heavy oak door behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a vault locking. I drove away down the long driveway past the manicured lawns and the sprinkler systems, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror. I sat alone in my empty rental house that night, surrounded by boxes of memories that apparently meant nothing to the people I had loved most. I was 47 years old, and I was starting over with nothing but my name and my conscience. I told myself I was better off. I told myself I was free. But freedom felt a lot like loneliness. Now, 15 years later, the afternoon light was fading outside my apartment window. My coffee had grown cold. The ceramic shards were still scattered on the floor. Somewhere across town, funeral preparations were underway for the woman who had once promised me forever. And I had no idea why she had remembered my name in her will. The 3 days between Franklin Rhodes' call and the funeral passed in a strange suspended state. I moved through my apartment like a ghost haunting my own life. I cleaned floors that were already clean and reorganized the toolbox that sat under my sink. I pressed my one good suit, a charcoal gray wool blend that I had bought for a cousin's wedding 5 years ago. It hung a little loose on my frame now, as I had lost some weight since then, mostly from forgetting to cook for just one person. I stood before my bathroom mirror adjusting a tie I had not worn in half a decade, wondering what Keisha would think of the man I had become. The reflection showed someone older than I felt inside. Silver hair where brown used to be and lines mapping the geography of quiet disappointments around my eyes and mouth. I looked like exactly what I was, a man who had survived but not conquered. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, typical May weather in Chicago where the wind off the lake cuts through even the heaviest coats. I drank my coffee, standing up in the kitchen, staring out at the gray sky that matched my mood. Each morning I had considered not going, but each evening found me still committed to paying my respects whatever the cost. I owed it to the girl in the red coat even if the woman she became had left me behind. The drive to the Southside Memorial Chapel took 20 minutes through neighborhoods that told the story of the city's economic divide. My modest apartment complex gave way to middle-class subdivisions with tricycles in the driveways, then to the gated communities where the fences were high and the lawns were manicured by crews of men who looked like me. The chapel sat on a hill overlooking the city, its Gothic architecture suggesting permanence and prosperity. It was a fortress of stone and stained glass designed to make death look dignified and expensive. Cars lined the circular drive, a parade of engineering that cost more than my entire life's earnings. There were sleek black Mercedes sedans, massive BMW SUVs that looked like tanks wrapped in velvet, and a handful of Teslas that hummed silently as they waited for valets. I drove my 15-year-old Honda Civic past the valet stand. The attendant, a young man in a crisp uniform, looked at my car with a mixture of confusion and pity. I shook my head and drove to the overflow lot in the back, parking between a Lexus and a Cadillac. My car rattled as I turned off the ignition, a dying cough that seemed loud in the reverent silence of the parking lot. I sat there for a moment gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I felt like an intruder at someone else's celebration. I felt like a weed in a garden of orchids. I stepped out into the biting wind and buttoned my coat. The walk to the main entrance felt like walking the Green Mile. I kept my head down, hoping to slip in unnoticed, but the chapel's heavy oak doors opened into a vestibule that was already crowded with mourners. The interior whispered money. Mahogany pews glimmered under tasteful lighting. Massive arrangements of white lilies and orchids filled the air with a scent that was sweet and cloying. There were at least 200 people filling the space, their conversations creating a low hum of respectful mourning mixed with aggressive business networking. I recognized some faces from the business dinners. Keisha had dragged me to during our married years, but most were strangers from the life she had built after me. These were the captains of industry, the movers and shakers, the people who shaped the skyline. They wore suits that fit perfectly and shoes that shined like mirrors. He slipped into a back pew, sliding as far into the shadows as I could, hoping to remain invisible until the service ended. But anonymity was a luxury I was not permitted today. Whispers followed my arrival like ripples in still water. A woman in an expensive black suit nudged her companion, pointing discreetly in my direction with a manicured hand. I caught fragments of conversation that drifted back to me. Her ex-husband. Can you believe he is here? After what he put her through? The stories had taken on their own life over the years. Apparently in this version of history I was the villain who had held back a brilliant woman. I was the anchor that had nearly drowned her ambitions before she cut the rope. I learned long ago not to fight narratives that served other people's need for simple explanations. It was easier for them to believe I was a failure than to understand that I simply had a different definition of success. I kept my eyes forward, focused on the closed casket at the front of the room. It was covered in a spray of white roses, simple and elegant. I wondered if she was at peace now. I wondered if the restless energy that had driven her to conquer the world had finally quieted down. A man I recognized from the old days, a lawyer named Sterling who had handled some of Keisha's early contracts, turned and saw me. His eyes widened in surprise and then narrowed in judgment. He leaned over to whisper to the man beside him, and they both turned to look at me. Their gazes were heavy with disdain. They looked at my suit, which was clearly off the rack. They looked at my scuffed shoes. They looked at my hands, which were rough from years of manual labor. I could hear their thoughts as clearly as if they had spoken them aloud. What is he doing here? He doesn't belong. He is looking for a handout. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but I forced myself to remain calm. I breathed in the scent of lilies and floor wax. I reminded myself that I was here for Keisha, not for them. I was here to say goodbye to the mother of my child. I was here to honor the memory of the woman who had once loved me enough to say forever. The atmosphere in the room was charged with a strange tension. It was not just grief, it was anticipation. These people were waiting for something. They were waiting to see who would inherit the throne. They were vultures in silk suits, circling a golden carcass, and I was the unwanted guest who had stumbled into their feast. I checked my watch. 5 minutes until the service began. I just had to survive an hour. 1 hour of judgment, 1 hour of whispers. Then I could slip out the side door and go back to my quiet life. I could go back to fixing sprinklers and drinking coffee and being nobody. But as I sat there trying to make myself small, I felt a shift in the room's energy. The low hum of conversation stopped abruptly. Heads turned toward the side entrance. The air grew thick with a new kind of tension, sharp and electric. I did not have to look to know who had arrived. The prince had entered the building and he was coming to claim his crown. Dead. The word was not a greeting, it was an accusation. It cut through the heavy air of the chapel like a serrated knife. I looked up to see Marcus striding down the aisle. His face was a mask of disbelief and barely controlled anger. At 37 years old, he had inherited Keisha's sharp features and her commanding presence. He was dressed in a black suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, the fabric shimmering slightly under the chapel lights. Success radiated from him like heat from a pavement in July. He wore an expensive watch, a perfect haircut, and the confident posture of someone who had never once doubted his place in the world. "What are you doing here?" His voice carried across the chapel, turning heads and silencing the few remaining conversations. The silence that followed was sudden and absolute. I stood slowly, my knees popping slightly with the effort meeting his gaze. "I came to pay my respects, Marcus. I came to say goodbye to your mother. You lost the right to do that 15 years ago." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. It was something musky and aggressive, a scent designed to intimidate. "She would not want you here?" "Maybe not," I said, keeping my voice low, hoping to de-escalate the situation. "But I needed to be here." "For what?" "To ease your conscience. To play the grieving widower for people who know exactly what kind of husband you were." The chapel had gone completely quiet now. 200 pairs of eyes were focused on our confrontation like spectators at a sporting event waiting for the knockout blow. I felt the familiar weight of judgment pressing down on my shoulders. It was the same pressure that had suffocated me during those final years of our marriage, but this time it was heavier. This time I was alone. "I am not here to cause trouble, Marcus. I will sit in the back. I will not speak to anyone. When the service ends, I will leave." "You will leave now." His voice rose another notch, drawing murmurs of approval from the crowd. "You embarrassed her enough when she was alive. Do not compound it by pretending to grieve her death." I remained standing, holding his stare. I saw the pain behind his anger, the raw wound of losing his mother, but I also saw the arrogance that had calcified over his heart. Around us, the chapel buzzed with anticipation. Someone coughed. A cell phone vibrated against wood. Before I could respond, Marcus turned to address the gathered mourners. His movement was theatrical. He was a prosecutor addressing a jury, and I was the defendant who had already been found guilty. "I apologize for this disruption during what should be a time of remembrance." He gestured toward me with the casual dismissal of someone swatting a fly. "My father seems to have forgotten that divorce means you are no longer family." A few people nodded. Someone whispered agreement. I felt heat rising in my cheeks but forced myself to remain calm. For those who do not know, Marcus continued, warming to his theme, "This is Isaiah Turner. This is the man who spent 22 years holding back one of the most brilliant women this city has ever produced. While my mother was building an empire that employed hundreds of people, he was content to punch a time clock and complain about her ambitions. "Marcus, that is enough," I said. The words came out harder than I intended. "Is it because I think these people deserve to understand why you are really here?" He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising with conviction. "He took half her assets in the divorce, despite contributing nothing to her success. Then he spent 15 years acting like the victim while she built something magnificent." The crowd was fully engaged now. I saw faces I recognized, former neighbors and people I had considered friends during the marriage. None of them met my eyes. They looked at Marcus with sympathy and at me with disgust. She supported him for years while he refused to grow. He refused to take risks. He refused to be the partner she deserved. And now that she is gone, he shows up expecting sympathy. He shows up expecting to be treated like he mattered in her life. Each word landed like a physical blow. They hurt not because they were entirely untrue, but because they reduced 22 years of marriage to a simple story of failure and blame. They erased the laughter in the diner. They erased the nights I held her while she cried over lost contracts. They erased the sacrifices I made so she could fly. I thought about defending myself. I thought about explaining the complexity of what we had shared. But what was the point? These people had chosen their narrative long ago. "My mother died building something that will outlast all of us," Marcus concluded. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. She deserved a husband who would have helped her reach those heights, not one who tried to drag her down to his level. The chapel fell silent. I stood there fully exposed, feeling the weight of 200 judgmental stares. I was the villain in their story. I was the anchor. I was the dead weight. Part of me wanted to walk out. I wanted to turn my back on this toxic display and spare myself the continued humiliation. But another part of me, the part that had loved Keisha Vance more than anything else in the world, refused to be driven away from her final goodbye. I refused to let my son's bitterness dictate my right to mourn. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. Marcus's eyes flashed with surprise. He had expected me to crumble. He had expected me to slink away in shame like a beaten dog. When I remained standing, his confidence flickered for just a moment. He looked at the crowd, then back at me, unsure of his next move. "I loved your mother for 40 years, I said. My voice carried clearly through the silent chapel, though I did not shout. 22 of them as her husband and 18 more as someone who wished her well despite everything that went wrong between us. I am not here to make claims or demand recognition. I am here because once upon a time we made promises to each other that mattered. I choose to honor that memory even if you cannot understand it." I sat back down, folding my hands in my lap. Around me the silence stretched uncomfortably. Marcus stood frozen in the aisle, apparently unprepared for resistance to his public trial. He had expected a surrender, and instead he got a stalemate. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. People shifted in their pews, uncomfortable with the raw emotion that had just been spilled on the pristine floor. "The service will begin in 5 minutes, someone announced from the front of the chapel. It was likely the funeral director trying to restore order to his carefully orchestrated event. Marcus shot me one final look of contempt. It was a look that promised retribution. It was a look that said, "This is not over." He turned on his heel and strode toward the front pew reserved for family, leaving me alone in the wreckage of his anger. As conversations gradually resumed, I caught fragments of continued gossip. The nerve of some people. Poor Marcus having to deal with this. He should have stayed home, but I stayed. I sat straight in the hard wooden pew, staring at the back of my son's head. I watched the way his shoulders were set in a rigid line of tension. I saw the grief he was trying so hard to hide behind his rage. He was a king in a castle of money, but in that moment he looked like the loneliest man in the world. And despite everything, despite the insults and the public shaming, I just wanted to go up there and put my arm around him. But I knew that bridge had burned down a long time ago. I stayed through the eulogy that painted Keisha as a visionary who had overcome obstacles to achieve greatness. I listened to readings from business associates who spoke of her leadership and innovation and her ruthless efficiency. They used words like titan and warrior and disruptor. They spoke about her as if she were a statue made of marble and gold, cold and perfect and untouchable. I sat there and closed my eyes and tried to remember the woman who used to steal the covers on cold winter nights. I tried to remember the woman who burned the first Thanksgiving turkey we ever made and laughed until she cried. That woman was not in this room. That woman had been erased by the legend these people had built around her. When the service ended, the organ music swelled to a crescendo that vibrated in my chest. People filed past the casket offering condolences to Marcus while pointedly ignoring me. I waited until the chapel had mostly emptied before standing to leave. I had done what I came to do. I had said goodbye to the ghost of my wife. Now I just wanted to escape the suffocating scent of lilies and judgment. I buttoned my jacket and stepped into the aisle, keeping my eyes on the exit sign that glowed red in the distance. Mr. Turner. The voice was not Marcus. It was deeper, smoother, and carried the weight of authority. I turned to see a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit approaching. He was older, perhaps 70, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and eyes that looked like they had seen every contract loophole in existence. He carried a leather briefcase that looked expensive enough to require its own insurance policy. Franklin Rhodes. I recognized him from the brief phone call that had started this nightmare. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm and dry, like shaking hands with a piece of parchment. "Thank you," I replied. "The service was very nice. Keisha would have appreciated it." Indeed she would have. She was quite specific about her final arrangements, right down to the flower arrangements and the seating chart. He paused, glancing around the emptying chapel with a critical eye. "I wonder if I might have a word with you and Marcus. There are some matters we need to discuss regarding Mrs. Turner's estate." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my shoulder like a bad omen. His expression shifted from practiced grief to alert interest when he saw the lawyer. Franklin, finally. I was wondering when we would handle the business side of things. He ignored me, completely focusing his attention on the man who held the keys to the kingdom. "Let us go to your office and get this signed. I have a board meeting on Monday, and I need the transfer completed by then." "Of course, Marcus. These matters require careful attention." Franklin's voice carried the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering important news to impatient people. "I would like both of you to come to my office for the reading of your mother's will. Both of us." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Is that necessary? I mean, he is not family." He gestured vaguely in my direction, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been left out on the curb. "Your father is specifically named in the will, Marcus. His presence is required by law." I felt a flutter of surprise. Named in the will. That seemed unlikely given everything that had passed between Keisha and me. More likely it was some minor formality. Perhaps she had left me a token item to clear her conscience, or maybe she had simply wanted to ensure I had no legal claim to contest the estate. "I do not think that is necessary," I said quietly. "I am sure it is just a formality. You do not need me there. I have a long drive back, and I am sure Marcus would prefer to handle this alone." Franklin's eyes met mine directly. They were gray and unyielding. "I am afraid I do, Mr. Turner." Mrs. Turner was very specific about who should be present for the reading. "Both you and Marcus must be there." "It is not a request. It is a stipulation of the trust." Something in his tone suggested this was not negotiable. It was a command wrapped in politeness. Marcus looked annoyed but shrugged with the casual confidence of someone who knew he had nothing to worry about. "Fine, let us get this over with." He turned to me with barely concealed impatience. "Try not to make this more difficult than it needs to be. Just sign whatever Franklin puts in front of you and go. I do not want to drag this out all afternoon." The walk to Franklin's office took us 3 blocks through downtown Chicago. The wind had picked up, whipping down the concrete canyons and biting at my exposed face. Marcus walked ahead, setting a brisk pace, while Franklin and I followed. The lawyer maintained professional small talk, commenting on the weather and the turnout at the service, but his eyes remained alert. He was watching us. He was measuring the distance between father and son, not just in feet but in years of silence. His office occupied the top floor of a restored historic building. It was a space of dark wood and leather-bound books that spoke of established success and old money. Certificates and diplomas lined the walls, interrupted by photographs of Franklin with various local dignitaries and business leaders. It was exactly the kind of place Keisha would have chosen. Prestigious, but not ostentatious. Successful, but respectful of tradition. It smelled of lemon polish and old paper. "Please, have a seat." Franklin gestured toward 2 leather chairs positioned in front of his mahogany desk. Marcus claimed the chair closest to Franklin, leaving me the one slightly to the side. This felt appropriate given my peripheral status in these proceedings. I sat down feeling the leather creak beneath me. I kept my coat on. I did not plan on staying long. Franklin settled behind his desk and opened a thick file folder. He extracted several legal documents with the careful precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. The afternoon light slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the suddenly quiet room. "Before we begin," Franklin said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to express my condolences again. Keisha was not only a valued client but someone I considered a friend. Her loss is deeply felt by everyone who knew her." Marcus nodded solemnly, though his eyes were already scanning the papers on the desk, trying to read upside down. I remained silent, unsure what response was expected from someone whose relationship with the deceased was so complicated. Franklin lifted the top document. It was several pages bound with a blue backing. He cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Keisha Elizabeth Turner, executed on March 11, 2020 POIF, and properly witnessed according to Illinois state law. The will supersedes all previous wills and codicils. Only 14 months ago." I wondered what had prompted Keisha to update her will so recently. Had she been sick? Had she known something was coming? The will confirms that Mrs. Turner was of sound mind and disposing memory when these documents were prepared, and that she was under no undue influence or coercion. Franklin's voice carried the formal cadence of legal proceedings. Each word was carefully enunciated, as if he were laying bricks for a wall that could not be knocked down. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together. I could see the anticipation in his posture. He was a man preparing to claim his inheritance. He was ready to finally step fully into the empire his mother had built. He looked like a runner at the starting block waiting for the gun to go off. I watched him and felt a sudden wave of sadness. He had no idea that he was running a race he had already lost. The antique clock in the corner of the office ticked with a slow, rhythmic, heavy sound that seemed to measure out the remaining moments of my anonymity. I sat perfectly still in the leather chair, trying to take up as little space as possible. Beside me, Marcus was a study in controlled impatience. He checked his watch. He smoothed the fabric of his trousers. He tapped his fingers against the armrest in a rapid staccato beat that betrayed his desire to be anywhere else. To him, this was just a final bureaucratic hurdle before he could get back to the real work of ruling the empire. To me, it felt like sitting in the principal's office, waiting for a punishment I did not understand. Franklin Rhodes adjusted his glasses and peered at the document through the bottom of the lenses. He looked like an owl perched high in a tree, looking down at two mice who were about to scurry through a maze. "I hereby declare this to be my last will and testament," he read. His voice was a dry monotone that stripped the words of any emotion. It was the voice of the law, impartial and cold. "I revoke all prior wills and codicils made by me. I direct that my executor pay all my just debts and funeral expenses as soon as practicable after my death." Marcus sighed loud enough to be heard over the ticking clock. "Can we skip the boilerplate, Franklin?" he asked. "We know she was solvent. We know the debts are covered. Let us get to the distribution of assets. I have a dinner reservation at 7. Franklin stopped reading. He lowered the paper slowly and looked at Marcus over the rim of his glasses. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. It was the kind of silence a teacher uses to discipline an unruly student without saying a word. "I appreciate that your time is valuable, Marcus," Franklin said softly. "But this is a legal proceeding. It must be done correctly. We will read the entire document." Marcus rolled his eyes but settled back into his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Fine, read it. But let us pick up the pace." Franklin returned his attention to the paper, but he did not speed up. If anything, he slowed down. He seemed determined to make us feel the weight of every syllable. I wondered if he was doing it on purpose. I wondered if he saw the disrespect Marcus carried like a shield and wanted to crack it. Or maybe he just wanted to delay the storm that he knew was coming. "I want to emphasize a specific clause before we continue," Franklin said, pausing again. He looked from Marcus to me and then back to Marcus. "Mrs. Turner included a specific declaration of mental competency. She underwent a full psychiatric evaluation on the day this will was signed. The results are attached as Exhibit A. She was certified to be of completely sound mind and fully aware of the consequences of her decisions." Marcus laughed, a short bark of sound that held no humor. Of course she was of sound mind. She was closing deals until 3 days before she died. She was the sharpest person in any room she walked into. Why would you even need to evaluate her? It is a precautionary measure, Franklin replied, his voice steady. It is designed to prevent any challenges to the will based on claims of incapacity or undue influence. Mrs. Turner wanted to be absolutely certain that her wishes would be carried out exactly as written. Undue influence, Marcus repeated, narrowing his eyes. He turned his head slightly to look at me. His gaze was a laser beam of suspicion. Who would influence her? She was not the kind of woman who let people tell her what to do, especially not people who did not understand her business. I looked at the floor, studying the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. I knew he was talking about me. He thought I had somehow crawled back into her life in the final days. He thought I had begged for a handout. He could not imagine a world where I simply stayed away because that is what she wanted. There was no influence, Franklin said, cutting off the accusation before it could grow roots. Mrs. Turner made these decisions alone. She was adamant. Then let us hear them, Marcus snapped. He leaned forward, his hunger for the inheritance finally breaking through his veneer of boredom. What did she leave me? I watched Franklin turn the page. The sound of the heavy paper turning was loud in the quiet room. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I did not want anything. I did not want her money. I did not want her stocks. I just wanted to leave this room and go back to my apartment where the only thing I had to worry about was a leaky sprinkler. I wanted to forget the way Marcus looked at me with such naked contempt. Franklin cleared his throat. I hereby make the following specific bequests, he read. To my son Marcus James Turner, I leave the family residence located at Delapan 51 Hillcrest Avenue, including all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained therein. Marcus smiled. It was a small, satisfied curving of his lips. The Hillcrest house was a fortress of luxury. It was worth at least $2 million in the current market. It was the house where I had felt so small. It was the house where our marriage had died. It was fitting that he would get it. He was the only one who had ever really felt at home there. Additionally, Franklin continued, I bequeath to Marcus the sum of $500,000 to be transferred from my primary liquid investment account within 60 days of probate. I saw Marcus nod. He was doing the math in his head. The house plus the cash. It was a substantial inheritance. It was more money than I would earn in 10 lifetimes. It was enough to secure his future forever. But as I watched him, I saw the smile falter. I saw a flicker of confusion cross his face. He was calculating not just what he had received, but what was missing. $500,000 was a lot of money to regular people. But to the Turner estate it was pocket change. It was a rounding error. Wait, Marcus said. His voice lost its smooth professional edge. 500,000, that is it. Franklin looked up. That is the specific monetary bequest, yes. But what about the rest? Marcus asked. His voice rose in pitch. What about the portfolio? What about the offshore accounts? What about the company? Franklin held up a hand. Please let me finish, Marcus. There are conditions attached to these bequests. Conditions, Marcus repeated. The word came out like a curse. What kind of conditions? I sat frozen in my chair. The air in the room had changed. The boredom was gone, replaced by a sharp biting tension. I watched Franklin clean his glasses slowly, methodically, giving the moment time to breathe. I watched Marcus unraveling inch by inch. And I realized, with a sudden cold clarity, that we were not just reading a will. We were walking into a trap. The bequest to Marcus, Franklin continued reading, includes the following strict conditions. The inheritance of the property and the cash sum is contingent upon his continued employment with Vance Consulting Solutions for a minimum of 2 years following the date of this will's execution. Should he resign or be terminated for cause prior to that date, the cash bequest shall be forfeited and returned to the primary estate. Marcus laughed again, but this time the sound was thin and brittle. It cracked in the air like dry wood. Continued employment. I am the Senior Vice President of Operations, Franklin. I run the day-to-day affairs of the entire firm. Who is going to terminate me? I am the heir. I am the future of the company. Franklin lowered the document slowly. He looked at Marcus with an expression that was almost pity. It was the look a doctor gives a patient who has not yet realized the diagnosis is terminal. That is the point, Marcus. You are an employee. You are not the owner. The room went deadly silent. I could hear the traffic on the street 3 stories down. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear the sudden intake of breath from my son as the reality of the words hit him. Not the owner. What are you talking about? Marcus whispered. His face had gone pale, the color draining away to leave him looking like a wax figure. I am the only son. I am the only family. Of course I am the owner. Who else would it be? I am reading the will as written, Franklin said calmly. Your mother left you the house and a generous cash stipend. She secured your position within the company by mandating your employment contract. But she did not leave you the company itself. She did not leave you the controlling shares. She did not leave you the chairmanship. Marcus stood up slowly. His movements were jerky and uncoordinated. The smooth corporate shark was gone, and in his place was a frightened, angry child who had just been told Santa Claus was dead. This is a mistake. This has to be a clerical error. You drafted this wrong. Mom would never do this. She spent 20 years grooming me for this role. She told me the empire would be mine. She told you many things, Marcus, Franklin replied, but in the end, she made a different choice. A different choice. Marcus slammed his hand down on the mahogany desk. The sound was like a gunshot. A different choice. You are telling me she gave the company to a board of directors. She turned it into a public trust. Is that it? She decided no one was good enough to run her baby, so she gave it to a committee. I watched this display with a growing sense of unease. I had seen Marcus angry before. I had seen him arrogant, but I had never seen him desperate. He was watching his entire identity crumble in real time. He was not Marcus Turner, the business prodigy, anymore. He was just Marcus Turner, the guy with a nice house and a job he could lose. Please sit down, Marcus, Franklin said. His voice was hard now. It was a command. We are not finished. Marcus remained standing for a long moment, his chest heaving. He looked at Franklin and then he looked at me. His eyes were wild. He looked at me as if I were part of the conspiracy, as if I were secretly laughing at him, but I wasn't laughing. I was grieving for him. I knew what it felt like to be deemed unworthy by Keisha Vance. It was a cold, dark place to be. Finally, Marcus sank back into his chair. He looked smaller than he had 5 minutes ago. Fine, he spat. If I don't own it, then who does? Who is signing my paycheck, Franklin? Who am I supposed to answer to? Franklin adjusted the papers on his desk. He took a sip of water from a crystal glass. He seemed to be preparing himself for the main event. He seemed to be gathering his strength for the explosion he knew was coming. Your mother's will contains additional provisions that address the disposition of her remaining assets, Franklin said. The company, her investment portfolio, and several other significant holdings. Well, let us hear it then, Marcus demanded. His voice was shaking. Who is the lucky beneficiary? Is it a charity? Did she leave it all to the cat shelter just to spite me? Or maybe she set up a scholarship fund in her own name so people would clap for her even after she was dead. I shifted in my chair. The leather squeaked beneath me. I felt a sudden urge to stand up and leave. I did not want to be here for this. I did not want to see who had replaced my son in Keisha's heart. I assumed it was some foundation. The Keisha Vance Institute for Business Excellence. Something cold and impressive, just like she had become. Franklin lifted the 3rd page of the will. He held it up to the light. He scanned the text briefly before looking up at both of us. His eyes stopped on me. They held a strange mixture of professional detachment and personal curiosity. However, Franklin said, his voice carrying a weight that made my stomach tighten, there are additional provisions that fundamentally alter the distribution of Mrs. Turner's estate. These provisions concern the controlling interest of Vance Consulting Solutions. Marcus leaned forward. His hands gripped the armrest of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. Finally, let us hear about the company. Let us hear who I have to fight to get what is mine. Franklin cleared his throat. He looked at me again. This time he didn't look away. To my former husband Isaiah Michael Turner, Franklin read, his words falling into the quiet office like stones dropped into deep water. He bequeathed the sum of $33.5 million to be transferred from my primary investment accounts and securities portfolio immediately upon settlement of the estate. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I felt my mouth fall open, a physical reaction I could not control. $33.5 million. The number was so large it did not seem real. It did not seem to apply to someone like me sitting in a lawyer's office in Chicago wearing a suit that smelled like mothballs. That was lottery money. That was movie star money. That was not sprinkler repairman money. There must be some mistake, I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant as if it were coming from someone else. Did you say 33 million? 33.5 million, Franklin corrected gently. Yes, Mr. Turner. There is no mistake. Dan Stone remained professionally neutral, but I caught something in his eyes. It was not surprise. It was the careful observation of someone watching a building collapse to see which way the debris would fall. Marcus's face had gone completely white. Then it flushed a deep angry red as if his blood could not decide which direction to flow. What did you just say? The question came out as a whisper, a hiss of escaping steam. Additionally, Franklin continued reading, apparently determined to deliver the complete bombshell before the room exploded. I transfer to Isaiah, Michael Turner controlling interest in Vance Consulting Solutions, including all subsidiary companies, real estate holdings, and business assets. This transfer includes 65% ownership of all corporate entities and an immediate appointment as chairman of the board of directors. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt sideways, as if the laws of physics had suddenly changed their minds about how the world should work. Controlling interest in Keisha's company. The empire I had watched her build from nothing. The business that had eventually consumed our marriage. The source of wealth that had made me feel so inadequate for so long. She was giving it all to me. This cannot be right, I whispered. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the arms of the chair to keep them steady. There has to be some error in the documentation. I do not know anything about running a consulting firm. I assure you, Mr. Turner, there is no error. Franklin removed his glasses again, cleaning them with methodical precision. These documents were prepared under Mrs. Turner's direct supervision. She reviewed every word multiple times. She was very specific about the percentages. She wanted to ensure you held the majority vote. Marcus shot to his feet so abruptly his chair rolled backward and struck the wall with a deafening crash. This is impossible. He screamed the words. She wouldn't. She couldn't. He turned to stare at me with an expression of pure disbelief mixed with something darker. What did you do? How did you manipulate her? I didn't do anything, I said weakly, still trying to process the impossibility of what I had just heard. I haven't spoken to your mother in 15 years, Marcus. You know that. Liar. The word exploded from him like a gunshot. People do not just give away $33 million to their ex-husbands for no reason. People do not hand over controlling interest of a Fortune 500 company to a man who fixes toilets for a living. You must have gotten to her somehow. You must have convinced her when she was sick, when she wasn't thinking clearly. Franklin's voice cut through Marcus's rising hysteria with professional authority. I can assure you that Mrs. Turner was of completely sound mind when she executed these documents. As I stated before, she underwent a thorough mental competency evaluation, specifically to prevent this exact reaction. She anticipated that her decision would be challenged. I sat frozen in my chair watching this scene unfold as if it were happening to someone else. The numbers Franklin had read belonged in a different universe than the one where I worried about grocery bills. But why? I asked. The question emerged from some deep place of confusion. Why would she do this? Franklin gathered the will documents into a neat stack, his movements careful and deliberate. Mrs. Turner left specific instructions regarding that question, Mr. Turner. She knew you would be confused. She knew Marcus would be angry. Angry. Marcus laughed, and it was a terrifying sound. I am not angry, Franklin. I am witnessing a crime. This is fraud. This is elder abuse. This is grand larceny, wrapped up in legal paper. He whirled toward me, his face twisted with fury. You did something to her. There is no other explanation. You played on her guilt. You crawled back in when she was weak, and you whispered poison in her ear. Marcus, I swear to you, I said, standing up slowly. I had no contact with her. I didn't even know she was sick until Franklin called me. Don't lie to me. He slammed his palm against Franklin's desk, sending papers scattering across the mahogany surface. Nobody gives away everything they have built to someone who abandoned their family. Someone who couldn't even be bothered to call when she was dying. She didn't abandon anyone, I said quietly, finding some small reserve of strength amidst the chaos. Our marriage ended. That doesn't mean I stopped caring. It means exactly that. Marcus's voice rose to a near shriek. You walked away from us. You took your pathetic settlement and disappeared into your pathetic little life while she built an empire. And now you want me to believe she just decided to hand it all over to you. You want me to believe she decided to make me your employee. He pointed a shaking finger at me. I will not work for you. Do you hear me? I will burn that company to the ground before I take orders from a man who couldn't even keep his own family together. Mr. Turner. Franklin interrupted. His voice was sharp, now losing its veneer of politeness. I must insist you control yourself. These are your mother's clearly stated wishes executed with full legal authority. You have a choice, Marcus. You can accept the terms of the will, keep the house, keep the cash, and keep your job, or you can contest it, lose everything, and walk away with nothing. Marcus spun toward the lawyer, his eyes blazing with the desperation of a trapped animal. I want every document examined. I want psychiatric evaluations. I want to know every single contact this man had with my mother in the past 5 years. I want his phone records. I want his bank statements. I am going to prove he stole this. There were no contacts, Franklin replied calmly. Mrs. Turner made that very clear when she explained her decision. Explained her decision. Marcus's laugh was bitter and sharp. So she did explain why she decided to betray her only son. She did explain why she decided to gut me in public. She left a personal message for your father. Yes. The word father seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. For just a moment his rage flickered and something else showed through. It was a pain so deep and raw it made my chest ache to watch it. Then the fury returned, doubled in intensity. He is not my father, Marcus snarled. My father would have been there when she needed him. My father would have supported her dreams instead of trying to drag her down. He turned back to me, his face contorted with years of accumulated resentment. You are nothing but a failed man who couldn't handle being married to someone better than you. And now you think money is going to fix that. You think money is going to make you important. Each word landed like a knife thrust. They hurt because they contained enough truth to draw blood. I had felt inadequate. I had struggled. But as I looked at my son, screaming and shaking in his expensive suit, I realized something. He wasn't protecting his mother's legacy. He was terrified of losing his own relevance. He wasn't angry because I was a bad father. He was angry because, for the first time in his life, he wasn't the most important person in the room. Maybe you are right, I said quietly. Maybe I wasn't the husband she deserved, but I never asked for this, Marcus. I never expected this. Expected it. Marcus's voice climbed another octave. You orchestrated this. Somehow, some way, you won. But do not think for a second that I am going to let you keep it. Franklin raised his hand, commanding silence with the authority of a judge. Enough, both of you. Before this goes any further, I have something that will explain everything. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It had my name written on it, in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere. It was the handwriting that used to leave notes on the refrigerator. It was the handwriting that had signed our marriage license. Keisha knew this moment would be difficult, Franklin said. She asked me to read this personal message after the will was announced. She wanted you to hear her voice one last time. Marcus slumped back into his chair. His rage was momentarily displaced by a desperate curiosity. He looked at the envelope in Franklin's hands like a drowning man looking at a life raft. I remained frozen. I was afraid to hope for understanding, but I was desperate for any explanation that might make sense of this impossible situation. Franklin cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses one last time. He began reading in a voice that was soft but carried into every corner of the room. My dearest Isaiah, if you are hearing this, it means I am gone. It means you are sitting in Franklin's office, probably looking for the nearest exit sign. I can picture your face. It is that same expression you used to get when I would rearrange the living room furniture without warning. You looked confused, but you were always too polite to complain. Despite everything, I felt my lips curve into the ghost of a smile. She had captured me perfectly. Even from the grave, she knew me better than I knew myself. I know this inheritance comes as a shock, the letter continued. I know you are thinking there has been some terrible mistake. You are thinking you do not deserve this money or this responsibility. But Isaiah, you are wrong. You deserve every penny, and I am going to tell you why. Franklin paused. He glanced up at both of us before continuing. I never stopped loving you, Isaiah. Not during our worst fights. Not during the divorce proceedings. Not during these 15 years of stubborn silence. I was angry with you for not understanding my ambitions. But I was angrier with myself for choosing those ambitions over our marriage. You tried to save us. You begged me to find balance. You begged me to remember what mattered. I was too proud and too afraid to listen. I thought that if I stopped running, the world would catch up to me and I would be poor again. So I kept running, and I left you behind. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt tears starting hot and unexpected. Decades of guilt and regret crystallized into this moment of impossible absolution. She had not hated me. She had been afraid. Marcus, the letter continued. I saw my son's head snap up at the sound of his name. My beautiful, brilliant boy. I know you are furious right now. You are probably convinced your father somehow manipulated me. You are probably shouting about fairness and legacy. But sweetheart, you are not ready for this inheritance. Not yet. Marcus's face went white. He looked like he had been slapped. You have lived your entire adult life in the shadow of my success. You accepted the benefits without understanding the responsibility. You have never had to build something from nothing. You have never had to make the hard choices between buying food or paying the electric bill. More importantly, you have spent 15 years hating a good man for crimes he never committed. That is not true, Marcus whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. He stared at the floor, unable to look at Franklin or me. I created a shark. Keisha's words cut through the room. I taught you how to negotiate. I taught you how to dominate a boardroom. I taught you that winning was the only thing that mattered. But I failed to teach you how to be a man. I failed to teach you kindness. I failed to teach you that people are more important than profits. I look at you, Marcus, and I see my own worst traits magnified. If I gave you this company now, it would destroy you. You would become a king with a hollow heart ruling over a kingdom of ash. I watched Marcus. He was trembling. The armor of the arrogant executive had been stripped away, leaving a frightened son who was hearing his mother's final judgment. So I am doing the hardest thing a mother can do, the letter read. I am taking away your safety net. I am giving you the house and enough money to be safe, but I am forcing you to work. I am forcing you to answer to someone else. I am forcing you to learn humility. Franklin turned the page. The paper rustled loudly in the silence. Isaiah. You are inheriting more than money. You are inheriting the chance to do what I should have done. You are inheriting the power to change this company's soul. I trust you because you never wanted this. I trust you because you have integrity. You spent your life fixing things that were broken. Now I am asking you to fix my life's work. Use this wealth as a tool for good rather than a weapon for proving superiority. Take care of our son. Teach him the things I couldn't. Teach him how to fish. Teach him how to be still. Teach him that a man is measured by his character, not his bank account. I was crying openly now. I did not care how it looked. Keisha's words were rebuilding something inside me that I thought was permanently broken. She was giving me back my dignity. She was telling me that my quiet life of service meant something. She was telling me that I was enough. The letter concluded with a final softness. I am sorry it took me a lifetime to say this. You were the love of my life, Isaiah Turner. You were my home. Please forgive me for losing my way. Please watch over Marcus until he finds his. Love always, Keisha. When Franklin finished reading, the office fell into a profound silence. It was a holy silence. The angry energy that had filled the room moments ago had evaporated, leaving only the heavy weight of truth. I sat with tears on my cheeks, overwhelmed by the gift of knowing that Keisha had loved me until the end. Marcus sat frozen. He looked shattered. The narrative he had built his life around, the story of the hero mother and the villain father, had just been dismantled by the only person whose opinion mattered. Franklin folded the letter carefully. He placed it back in its envelope and held it out to me. She asked me to give this to you, Isaiah. The original is yours to keep. I reached for the letter with trembling hands. I held it against my chest, feeling the physical reality of her final gift. It was not the money. It was the restoration of my worth. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at his hands, which were resting limp in his lap. He looked lost. He looked like a man who had woken up on a strange planet, with no map and no language. For the first time in 15 years, I did not see a rival. I did not see a stranger. I saw my son. I saw the boy who had been twisted by a world he didn't understand. And I knew that Keisha was right. This was not a punishment. It was a rescue mission. She had broken his legs to save his life. She had stripped him of his crown so he could finally learn how to walk. The silence in the office stretched thin and tight until Marcus finally broke it. His voice sounded scraped raw, stripped of the polish he wore like armor. "You cannot do this," he said, staring at the floor. "You cannot run this company, Isaiah. You do not know the first thing about corporate governance or international markets. You are going to drive it into the ground within a year." I looked at my son, and for the first time I did not feel the need to apologize for who I was. He was right, of course. I did not know how to run a multinational corporation. I did not know how to read a balance sheet or negotiate a merger. But Keisha knew that. She had not left me the company because of my business acumen. She had left it to me because of my heart. "You are right, Marcus," I said softly. "I do not know how to be a CEO. I do not know how to play the game the way you and your mother played it." "Then walk away." He looked up, his eyes burning with a desperate hope. "Refuse the inheritance. Give it to me. I can protect her legacy. I can keep the company safe. You can take the money. Take the 33 million and go live on an island somewhere. Just give me the work. It is all I have." I shook my head slowly. "That is exactly why I cannot give it to you. The work is all you have because you let it consume everything else. Your mother did not give me this company to increase its stock value. She gave it to me to save its soul. And she gave it to me to save you." "Save me," he laughed, a bitter broken sound. "You think humiliating me is saving me. You think making me answer to my father who fixes sprinklers is going to teach me character. I think it is the only thing that will," I replied. "I am not going to run the day-to-day operations, Marcus. I will hire people for that. Maybe one day, if you prove yourself, I will hire you for that. But as chairman, I am going to set the direction. I am going to make sure we treat people with dignity. I am going to make sure we build things that last. And I am going to make sure that no one in this company ever feels the way I felt in that house on Hillcrest Avenue." Marcus stood up. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. He was seeing me clearly for the first time in his life, not as an embarrassment but as a force he could not move. "This isn't over," he said, but the fire was gone from his voice. "I am not going to quit. I am going to stay in the company. I am going to prove you wrong. I am going to prove I am better than you. I hope you do," I said sincerely. "I hope you become the man your mother knew you could be. I am not firing you, son. I am waiting for you." He looked at me for a long moment, searching for a trace of sarcasm or malice, but he found only patience. He grabbed his coat and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the brass knob. He did not look back. He just opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, leaving the room quieter and larger than it had been before. The latch clicked shut, a sound that felt like a period at the end of a long and painful sentence. Franklin let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding for an hour. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Well, Mr. Turner, that went better than I expected." I looked at the lawyer, surprised. "You expected worse." "He expected violence," Franklin admitted with a tired smile. "Or a lawsuit filed before he left the building. Keisha was right about you, Isaiah. You have a quiet strength that is very disarming." He began organizing the papers on his desk into neat stacks. "There will be a mountain of paperwork to get through in the coming weeks. We need to schedule board meetings, press releases, and asset transfers. The current management team is excellent and they will help you transition into your new role. But for today, I think we have done enough." I stood up, my legs feeling heavy but steady. I picked up the envelope containing Keisha's letter. It felt warm in my hand. "Thank you, Franklin, for everything." I walked out of the building and stepped onto the busy Chicago sidewalk. The wind had died down and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. The skyscrapers towered above me, monuments to ambition and power, but they no longer felt intimidating. They were just buildings. They were just steel and glass and concrete. They were things that could be built and things that could be fixed. I buttoned my coat and started walking toward the parking lot where my old Honda was waiting. I had a lot to learn and had a company to understand and a son to redeem. I had a legacy to steward. But as I merged into the traffic driving a car worth $2,000 while owning a fortune worth millions, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in years. I was not just a survivor anymore. I was a father again, and I finally understood that justice was not about punishment, it was about making things right. If this story satisfied your need for justice, share this with someone who needs to hear that good guys finish first. And don't forget to follow for more stories about underestimated fathers taking back their power.